Sometimes the heaviest battles are fought in silence, not with screams or slamming doors, but with the quiet sealing of an envelope, with the tremble of a hand choosing truth over illusion. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have in the mail, and Julia Harper's trembling hands. Through the frosted glass windows of her Aspen home office, February's snow fell in lazy spirals, each flake carrying the weight of finality. Her fingers traced the printed label one last time. Cameron Wells, Rowan, CEO of Rowan Holdings. At 7 months pregnant, Julia's body curved protectively around her unborn child as she sealed the envelope containing the divorce papers. No letter, no explanation, no desperate pleas, just official documents speaking the truth. Her voice couldn't bear to say it. Her reflection in the window caught her off guard, dark curls falling past her shoulders, green eyes rimmed with exhaustion, and a quiet determination settling into the corners of her mouth. She hardly recognized herself anymore. This woman who had finally found the courage to stop pretending. The house around her felt like a beautiful prison. Gleaming hardwood floors and curated artwork hand-picked by Cameron's interior designer. Every surface told the story of perfection they had crafted for the world, but Julia had learned perfection was just another word for emptiness. Her phone buzzed again, the 5th time in the last hour. Another society event she was expected to attend. Another opportunity for Cameron to parade his pregnant wife while his eyes followed Savannah Blake across the room. Julia's hand instinctively moved to silence the device, a gesture she had perfected over the past months. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder of why she couldn't stay silent anymore. Not when 2 lives were at stake. She reached for her coat, the simple wool one, not the designer piece Cameron insisted she wear to maintain their image, and picked up her car keys. The envelope sat in her purse like a live wire, crackling with potential energy. The drive into downtown Denver passed in a blur of gray skies and brake lights. Each mile marker brought her closer to Cameron's office, his glass and steel monument to success. How many times had she stood in that lobby, smiling beside him at press conferences? How many times had she watched him command rooms while she faded into the background, her voice growing smaller with each passing day? Julia parked in a public lot 2 blocks away, not in his building's reserved space. Her boots crunched in the fresh snow as she made her way through the afternoon crowd. No one noticed her. Not the way they noticed Savannah with her calculated grace and Instagram-ready poses. Julia had always been invisible here. Today, that invisibility was her armor. The security guard recognized her. "Of course, Mrs. Rowan. Didn't expect to see you today. Mr. Rowan's in a board meeting until—" "I'm just dropping something off," she said softly, her voice steady. Despite the thunder of her heart, "Could you make sure this reaches his desk?" Julia asked. The envelope passed from her hands to his, a simple gesture to end 6 years of marriage. As she turned to leave, movement caught her eye through the lobby's expansive windows. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, and there they were, Cameron and Savannah, emerging together, laughing at some shared joke. Savannah's hand rested casually on Cameron's arm, her red-soled heels clicking against the pavement. They hadn't noticed Julia standing in the shadows of the lobby. The baby kicked again, harder this time. A sharp ache bloomed low in her abdomen, not just from the force of the kick, but from something deeper. Recognition, finality. That laughter outside wasn't just cruel, it was careless. The kind of joy that belonged to people who had never been left behind. Julia swallowed against the sting in her throat, her eyes fixed on the hand Savannah had so effortlessly placed where hers used to be. Julia pressed a hand to her side, feeling the pure, honest life beneath her palm. In that moment, watching her husband guide his mistress toward the building's entrance, Julia made a silent promise to her unborn child. We deserve more than shadows. She slipped out through a side door before they could enter, the cold air biting at her cheeks. Behind her, the envelope began its journey to Cameron's desk, carrying with it the silence that would soon shatter their carefully crafted world. Julia drove home through the thickening snow, her hands steady on the wheel for the first time in months. She didn't turn on the radio to drown out her thoughts. Instead, she let the silence fill the car, wrapping around her like a blanket of newfound strength. It wasn't peace. Not yet, but it was the closest she had come in a long while. There was power in letting the quiet speak. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of what it might say. She had no way of knowing that. At that very moment, a clock had started ticking, one that would transform her quiet act of courage into something none of them could have predicted. The first sign that something was wrong came at 7:43 the next morning, when Julia's credit card was declined at Bell's pharmacy. She stood at the counter, a bottle of prenatal vitamins in hand, while the teenage cashier swiped the card again. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Rowan, it's saying insufficient funds." The girl's voice dropped to a whisper, cheeks flushing with secondhand embarrassment. Julia's fingers curled around her phone, muscle memory nearly making her call Cameron's assistant to fix the problem. But that wasn't her life anymore. The realization cut deeper than she expected. Her safety net, once stretched tight beneath her, had vanished overnight. No warning, no discussion, just absence. Instead, she pulled out her personal debit card, the one tied to the modest savings account she had kept from her years as a teacher. The vitamin bottle rattled in her purse as she hurried back to her car, breath forming small clouds in the crisp February air. The car's dashboard clock reminded her she had 20 minutes until her OB/GYN appointment. 20 minutes to figure out why her cards weren't working. Her banking app wouldn't load. Neither would her email. Each failed login felt like another door slamming shut. The world that once answered to her voice now stood silent. 3 blocks from Dr. Lane's office, her phone lit up with an unknown number. Julia answered through her car's Bluetooth, her voice echoing in the empty vehicle. "Mrs. Rowan?" A crisp, professional voice cut through the static. "This is Leonard Walsh from Rowan Holdings' legal department. We need to discuss some concerning developments." The baby shifted restlessly as Julia pulled into the medical center's parking lot. "My name is Julia Harper," she corrected quietly, surprising herself with her own steadiness. "Miss Harper, then," the voice replied as papers shuffled faintly in the background. "We've been instructed to inform you that pending resolution of certain legal matters, your access to joint accounts and company benefits has been temporarily suspended. This includes your health insurance." The words hit her like ice water. Her prenatal appointment, scheduled in less than 10 minutes, would now cost over $300 out of pocket. The nursery furniture she'd ordered just last week, the mortgage payment due next Tuesday. "Mr. Rowan is concerned about potential damage to the company's reputation," Walsh continued, his tone suggesting he was reading from a prepared statement. "Any public statements regarding your personal situation could be considered defamatory." Julia ended the call, her hand moving automatically to her belly. The baby kicked, a Morse code of worry against her palm. In Dr. Lane's waiting room, she stared at her phone's blank screen. Reality settled around her like frost on a window pane. Cameron hadn't just cut her off. He'd erased 6 years of marriage, reduced it to a footnote labeled potential damage. "Miss Harper?" The nurse's gentle voice broke through her thoughts. "Dr. Lane would like to speak with you before we proceed." Dr. Lane's office hadn't changed since last week. Same degrees on the wall, same faded watercolor prints of mountain lakes, same kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. But everything else had. "Your insurance was declined this morning," Dr. Lane said, leaning forward slightly. "But I want you to listen carefully. This appointment is on me. We'll figure out the rest." Tears pressed against Julia's eyelids, but she blinked them back. She'd done enough crying in exam rooms. "There's something else," Dr. Lane continued, her expression shifting. "Your blood pressure is concerning me. With your history of anxiety." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "You need support right now. Real support. Do you have somewhere you can go? Someone you can stay with?" Through the window behind Dr. Lane's desk, Julia watched a cardinal land on a snow-covered branch, its red feathers blazing against the white backdrop, defiant and alive. "My aunt," Julia heard herself say, "in Asheville, North Carolina." Dr. Lane was already writing something on her prescription pad. "The mountain air might do you both some good. I'll coordinate with a colleague there. Make sure you have continuous care." That evening, Julia stood in her walk-in closet, surrounded by designer dresses she'd never chosen and shoes she'd never loved. Her hands found the old duffel bag shoved into the back corner, the one she brought with her from Boston, from her teaching days before Cameron, before everything. She filled it with pieces of herself she'd kept hidden. Worn jeans, soft sweaters, the journal she'd stopped writing in after the second miscarriage. At the bottom of her jewelry box, beneath the diamonds and sapphires, she found her grandmother's silver locket. Her phone buzzed again. Savannah's face appeared on the screen, probably calling to clear the air, or find clarity, or whatever phrase her social media followers were using this week. Julia let it ring. Outside, the cardinal's song pierced the gathering dusk, a single note of courage in the winter silence. The Greyhound bus wound through the Blue Ridge Mountains like a tired serpent, each curve bringing her closer to a past she had once left behind. Aunt Marian had offered to wire money for a plane ticket, but Julia had declined. After years of private jets and helicopter transfers, there was something honest about the bus's worn seats and clouded windows. Dawn painted the mountains in watercolor shades of purple and gold as they crossed the Tennessee border into North Carolina. Julia pressed her forehead to the cool glass, watching her breath create small clouds of fog. The baby had been restless all night, as if sensing the magnitude of their escape. Her phone, now stripped of all its fancy apps and running on a basic prepaid plan, held 17 missed calls from Cameron's office. The last voicemail from his PR team had mentioned something about narrative control and mutual public statements. She deleted it without listening to the end. The Asheville bus station hadn't changed much in the decade since she'd left for college. Same peeling paint, same vending machine that only accepted exact change. Same lingering scent of coffee and diesel fuel. But the woman who stood waiting, silver hair tied back in a practical braid, flannel shirt, and worn boots, made Julia's throat tighten with emotion. "Well, look what the mountain wind blew in," Aunt Marian said, opening her arms. She smelled of lavender and wood smoke, exactly as Julia remembered. The embrace lasted longer than either of them expected. When they pulled apart, Marian's sharp eyes took in everything. The shadows under Julia's eyes, the way she cradled her belly, the single duffel bag that held all she'd chosen to keep of her old life. "You've got your mama's spine," Marian said quietly, picking up the bag before Julia could protest. "Steel wrapped in silk. Come on, the truck's running." Marian's ancient Ford pickup grumbled along mountain roads, past meadows still touched with frost and woods where winter clung to bare branches. The radio played old country songs, the kind Julia's mother used to hum while making Sunday breakfast. "Your room's ready," Marian said as they turned onto a gravel drive. "Changed the sheets this morning. Had to chase a squirrel out of the attic, but other than that, the house is mostly behaving itself." The house, a rambling, two-story craftsman that had sheltered 4 generations of their family, stood proud against the mountainside. Its white paint was fading, and the porch steps creaked, but the old swing still hung steady, and smoke curled from the chimney like a welcome sign. "I put some soup on before I left," Marian continued, leading the way inside. "Nothing fancy, just bean and ham." Julia's voice caught. It was her mother's recipe, the one from the index card with the coffee stain in the corner. "Some things don't need changing," Marian said, her weathered hand squeezing Julia's shoulder. "Let's get you settled," Marian began, before a bark interrupted her, followed by the click of nails on hardwood. Around the corner came the most disheveled dog Julia had ever seen. Gray-brown fur stuck out at wild angles, one ear permanently flopped, and his eyes held entire worlds of wisdom and mischief. "That's Scout," Marian said. "Found him last month, half frozen by the creek. Meant to take him to the shelter?" She shrugged. "But he's got a way of making you forget he wasn't always meant to stay." Scout approached Julia slowly, tail wagging with cautious hope. When she knelt awkwardly with her pregnant belly to offer her hand, he pressed his wet nose to her palm with infinite gentleness. "He knows," Marian said softly. "Animals always know who needs them most." That afternoon, as mountain shadows stretched across the weathered floorboards, Julia unpacked her few belongings. Each item seemed to shed its Manhattan gloss in the honest mountain light. Her laptop no longer a status symbol but a tool. Her clothes just fabric to keep warm. Her mother's locket a treasure, worth more than all the diamonds she'd left behind. As she unzipped her duffel and pulled out the folded cardigan, the journal she hadn't touched since her second miscarriage slipped free, landing softly on the bed. She stared at it for a long moment, heart aching with memory. With a trembling hand, she slid it under her pillow, not ready to open it, but not willing to hide it again either. Later, while folding a worn sweater, Julia paused, suddenly overwhelmed by a wave of doubt. What if she had made a mistake? What if leaving meant her child would grow up with less security, less opportunity, fewer answers? Her throat tightened. She sat on the edge of the bed, pressing a hand to her belly. "I hope I didn't run," she whispered. "I hope I fought." The baby shifted gently in response, and she closed her eyes, breathing through the ache. Scout lay in the doorway, watching her with steady eyes. Every few minutes he would get up to check on her, pressing gently against her leg before returning to his post. A winter wren's song mixed with the sound of Marian chopping wood for the evening fire. When her phone buzzed again, this time flashing Savannah's number, Julia found herself doing something she'd never done before. She turned it off completely. The silence that followed felt like taking a full breath after years of shallow ones. Not the kind of silence she'd grown used to, the kind that shrank her, but a silence that expanded, that made space for thought, for healing. It was the first time in months she felt like she could just be. As dusk settled over the mountains and the first stars pricked the sky, Julia sat on her childhood bed. The quilt beneath her fingers held decades of stories, including, she realized, the one she was about to write. Scout's head rested on her knee, his presence anchoring her to this moment, this choice, this beginning. Somewhere in Denver, Cameron was probably just leaving his office, stepping back into his carefully curated world of boardrooms and brand strategy. But here, in this room where her mother had once dreamed her own dreams, something shifted inside Julia. Like ice breaking up on a spring river. The baby kicked, stronger than ever. This time, it felt like applause. Julia woke to unfamiliar sounds. Scout's nails clicking against hardwood, birds she couldn't name calling out to the dawn, a rhythmic thud pulsing through the mountain air. Wrapping herself in her mother's old cardigan, she moved to the window, breath fogging the glass in the pre-dawn chill. Through the gray light, she saw him, a solitary figure splitting wood in Marian's backyard. Even from this distance, his military bearing was unmistakable. Spine straight, movements precise, each swing of the axe deliberate and controlled. His shaved head caught the first glint of sunrise. "That's Noah," Marian said from the doorway, making Julia start. She carried 2 steaming mugs of tea, offering one with a knowing look. "Comes by 3 times a week to help with the heavy work. Says it's better than therapy." "Does he always come this early?" Julia asked, breathing in the familiar scent of Earl Grey. "Dawn patrol," Marian nodded. "Military habits die hard. He served 3 tours before." She paused, choosing her words carefully. He decided the mountains were a better place to fight his battles. Below, Noah stacked the split wood with geometric precision. Scout had made his way down to the yard, sitting quietly, head tilted, like he was studying the rhythm. When Noah paused to wipe his brow, he acknowledged the dog with a slight nod, a soldier recognizing a fellow sentry. "He's good people," Marian continued. "Keeps to himself mostly, but he's there when you need him. Helped me rewire the whole house last summer after that lightning strike." The baby shifted, pressing sharply against Julia's ribs. She winced, drawing Marian's attention. "Speaking of help," her aunt said, "you've got that doctor's appointment in town today. I'd drive you, but my arthritis is singing opera this morning. I can call a cab. Already handled." Marian smiled. "Noah's headed that direction anyway. He'll get you there safe." Before Julia could protest, Marian had already disappeared down the creaking stairs, leaving behind the scent of lavender and decisive action. An hour later, Julia stood on the porch, watching Noah secure a car seat into his weathered Jeep. His movements were efficient, each strap checked and double-checked with military precision. "It's not new," he said, his voice quieter than she expected, with a faint Carolina drawl. "But it's safe. My sister's kids use it when they visit." He straightened, green eyes meeting hers with steady calm. A scar traced his left jawline, silver in the morning light. The drive into downtown Asheville was mostly silent, but it wasn't the hollow kind she'd known with Cameron. This silence felt respectful. Noah navigated the winding mountain roads with the same calm focus he'd shown splitting wood, while Scout, who had insisted on coming, sat regally in the back seat. "You can drop me at the corner," Julia said as they approached the medical center. "I can walk." "I'll wait," Noah replied simply. "These appointments can be long, no sense calling a cab." Something in his tone brooked no argument, yet carried no judgment. It was the voice of someone who understood what it meant to need help, but hate asking for it. In the waiting room, surrounded by other expectant mothers with wedding rings, detailed birth plans, and partners holding their hands, Julia felt that familiar tightness return to her chest. Her fingers found her mother's locket, worrying the silver surface. "Mrs. Rowan?" the receptionist called, then flushed at Julia's slight flinch. "I'm sorry, Miss Harper, there's an insurance issue we need to discuss outside." Through the plate glass windows she could see Noah's Jeep. He sat reading what looked like a worn paperback, while Scout maintained his vigilant watch from the back seat. They looked like they could wait forever if needed, steady as the mountains themselves. The appointment was harder than Julia had expected. Dr. Chen, Dr. Lane's colleague, had concerns about her blood pressure, her stress levels, the dark circles under her eyes that betrayed too many sleepless nights. But unlike the cold, clinical language she'd grown used to in Denver, Dr. York's words carried warm understanding. "You're carrying two burdens," he said, reviewing her chart. "The baby and everything else. Let's focus on lightening the second one." When Julia emerged an hour later, clutching a new prescription and trying to hide her red-rimmed eyes, Noah was waiting by the entrance. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer platitudes. He simply opened the Jeep's door and steadied her arm as she climbed in. "Rough day?" he observed quietly as they pulled away from the clinic. Julia nodded, her throat too tight for words. "There's a place up ahead," he continued, his voice still gentle but matter-of-fact. "Best biscuits in 3 counties. Scout's a fan of their bacon." In the back seat, Scout's tail thumped at the word bacon. The diner was nothing like the sleek Denver brunch spots Cameron had preferred. Its vinyl booths were cracked, the coffee strong enough to strip paint, and the waitress, Jolene, according to her name tag, called everyone honey like she meant it. Noah ordered simply, "The usual Jolene, ×2. When the biscuits arrived, drenched in gravy and flanked by eggs that clearly came from someone's backyard coop, Julia realized she was actually hungry, really hungry, for the first time in weeks. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by Scout's hopeful sighs from under the table. Through the window, Julia could see the mountains rising above the town, their peaks wrapped in morning mist. They looked like guardians, she thought, like sentinels keeping watch. "Thank you," she said finally, as Noah paid the check despite her protests, "for everything." He nodded once, acknowledging what she meant rather than what she said. "Dawn patrol tomorrow," he replied. "Wood won't split itself." It wasn't an invitation or a promise, just a statement of fact, as solid as the mountains themselves. For the first time since leaving Colorado, Julia felt her shoulders relax, just a little. She was beginning to learn. Sometimes healing started with biscuits and silence, with dawn patrols and steady hands, with people who understood that some battles couldn't be fought alone. The laptop screen cast a pale blue glow across Julia's face as she stared at the headline, "Power Couples Split Rocks Denver Social Scene." Below it, a photo of Cameron and Savannah at last month's charity gala, her in designer white, him in tailored black, both wearing camera-ready smiles. The article's tone was carefully neutral, but the comments underneath burned with speculation. "Heard his pregnant wife just disappeared." "Savannah's latest IG story is pure queen energy. Sources say stress-induced separation." Scout's wet nose pressed against her hand, sensing her unease. Outside, rain drummed gently against the attic window of Marion's house, turning the mountain morning gray and introspective. "Don't poison yourself. Don't poison yourself with that garbage," Marion's voice cut through the darkness. She stood in the doorway, holding a tray with ginger tea and dry toast. Julia's only reliable breakfast these days. Nothing good grows in toxic soil. Julia closed the laptop, but the images lingered like after-images on her retinas. Savannah had already updated her social media bio to include Rowan Holdings, positioning herself as the company's director of digital strategy, the very position Julia had been quietly developing for months. "I need to do something," Julia said, accepting the tea. "I can't just disappear. Let them write my story for me." Marion settled into the old rocking chair by the window, its familiar creak a counterpoint to the rain. Then write it yourself, she said simply. You used to be good at that before you started letting others hold the pen. The memory surfaced unexpectedly. Teenage Julia sitting at this same window, filling notebooks with hopes and fears and dreams. Before college, before Boston, before she'd met Cameron at that fundraiser and started editing herself into someone else's narrative. Scout's head settled in her lap as she opened a new browser window. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. Then, slowly at first, but with growing certainty, she began to type. The words were cautious at first, like testing water that might still be too cold. But each sentence brought warmth, each phrase a reminder that her voice still lived within her, just waiting for permission. To my daughter. They say the most dangerous stories are the ones we tell ourselves. For 6 years I told myself that silence was the same as peace, that disappearing into someone else's shadow meant safety, that love looked like perfect photos in empty rooms. The words came faster now, spilling out like the rain outside. She wrote about fear and false strength, about midnight doubts and morning sickness, about the weight of expectations and the lightness of finally letting go. She wrote with hands that remembered trembling, with eyes that had once stared blankly into hotel bathroom mirrors at 2 a.m., searching for the woman she used to be. No names, no accusations, just raw, honest truth about motherhood, loss, and finding yourself in the spaces between other people's versions of you. She posted it anonymously on a parenting forum, tagged simply, "Letters to my unborn child." Then she closed the laptop and sat back, listening to the rain hit the porch roof in slow, steady rhythm. The numbers on the screen had meant something, but in the stillness afterward the ache of solitude crept in. All those women reaching out, their voices blinking to life in digital spaces. Yet here, in this quiet room tucked in the mountains, Julia was still alone. Her voice might be echoing out there, but no one knew her name. No one had looked her in the eye and said, "I see you." When Noah arrived for his usual dawn patrol the next morning, he found her on the porch. Despite the continuing rain, her laptop was open. Her eyes were wide. "It has 3,000 views," she whispered, her voice a mix of wonder and terror. "People are sharing it, commenting, so many of them saying they feel the same way." He settled on the porch step below her, his customary silence offering space for her words to breathe. Scout moved between them, a furry pendulum of support. One woman said she read it to her teenage daughter, Julia continued. Another one printed it for her divorce support group. "They're asking for more." "Then write more," Noah said quietly, his voice barely audible above the rain. He wasn't looking at her, but at the mountains emerging from the morning mist. Some battles are fought with bullets, others with words. The baby kicked, as if in agreement. Julia's hand moved to her belly, feeling the strong, steady rhythm of new life beneath her skin. Her phone buzzed, Savannah's number again. But this time, instead of anxiety, Julia felt something else rise in her chest. Something that felt like the mountain dawn, like Scout's unwavering loyalty, like Noah's steady presence. Something that felt like her own voice, growing stronger. She turned off the phone and opened a new document. To my daughter. Today, I learned that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through rain-soaked mornings. Sometimes it looks like an old dog's faithful eyes or a scarred soldier's quiet strength. Sometimes it's nothing more than fingers on a keyboard, telling truths that need to be told. Marion appeared with fresh tea, took one look at Julia's face, and smiled. "There's your mama's spine," she said softly, steel wrapped in silk. Through the rain-washed window, Julia caught her reflection. Dark waves pulled back into a practical ponytail, green eyes clear and focused, mouth set in quiet determination. For the first time in years, she recognized herself. Back in Denver, Cameron's PR team was likely already drafting carefully worded statements. Savannah was probably staging her next strategic photo op. And the social media machine was churning out its own version of reality. But here in this attic room, where generations of strong women had weathered their own storms, Julia was finally writing her story. One truth at a time, one word at a time, one dawn at a time. The rain continued to fall, but its rhythm had changed. Now it sounded less like tears and more like applause. The first crack of spring thunder woke her at midnight. Her blog post from that morning about the quiet strength of ordinary mothers had gone viral. shared across multiple platforms. 20,000 views, hundreds of comments, dozens of personal messages from women telling their own stories. Of silence, of survival, of starting over. Scout pressed closer to her bed, his furry body tense with each thunderclap. Through the attic window, lightning lit the mountains in stark flashes, turning the familiar landscape into something wild and primordial. Her phone lit up. Unlisted number. Against her better judgment, Julia answered. "I know it's you." Savannah's voice slid through the line, silk over steel, polished even at midnight. The writing style, the timeline, the careful omission of names. "Did you really think you could hide behind an anonymous blog?" The baby stirred restlessly as Julia sat up, one hand protectively cradling her belly. "What do you want, Savannah?" "To help you." A pause, calculated for maximum effect. "Look, we're both professional women, educated. There's no need for this to get messy. Cameron's prepared to be very generous with the settlement, assuming certain conditions are met." Lightning flashed again, and in its reflection on the window, Julia no longer saw the polished corporate wife. She saw something stronger, something real. "What conditions?" she asked, though she already knew. "Delete the blog, sign an NDA. We'll position this as an amicable separation. Creative differences, diverging paths. You'll be taken care of. Your child will want for nothing, and everyone keeps their dignity." Thunder rolled across the mountains like distant artillery. Below, a light flicked on, Noah's dawn patrol starting early, checking the property after the storm's first assault. "My dignity isn't for sale," Julia said quietly. "Neither is my voice." "Don't be naive," Savannah snapped. "You're not just writing about yourself anymore. Every post, every little confession, every subtle hint. It affects real people, companies, contracts. Do you have any idea how many deals are hanging in the balance? How many jobs? How much money?" "I know exactly how much money," Julia interrupted, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "I spent 6 years watching it, all of it, in silence, but I'm not in the market anymore." She ended the call just as another lightning bolt split the sky. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something that felt like dawn breaking. A soft knock at her door. "May I?" Marian's voice came first, followed by Noah's deeper tones from the hallway. "Perimeter secure, but the creek's rising." Julia opened the door to find them both, Marian in her flannel robe, Noah still in his rain gear, each wearing expressions of quiet concern. "Storm's gonna be rough," Marian said, studying Julia's face. "Noah thinks we should move to the first floor, just in case." As if in agreement, a massive thunderclap shook the house. Scout pressed against Julia's legs, trembling. They relocated to the living room, where Noah had already stoked the fire to life. Marian disappeared into the kitchen, returning with her emergency ritual, hot chocolate made from scratch, just like Julia's mother used to make it. "Phone call?" Noah asked quietly as Marian handed out steaming mugs. It wasn't really a question. His military instincts had likely catalogued every sound in the house. Julia nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. "They want me to stop writing." "Of course they do," Marian said, settling into her armchair. "Truth's got a way of making powerful people nervous." Lightning lit the room in stark flashes, casting dramatic shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving the rain in sheets against the windows. "Your latest post," Noah said, his voice nearly lost beneath another thunderclap. "The one about the mother whose husband died in Afghanistan, about how she rebuilt, found her voice again." He paused. His green eyes reflected the firelight. "I knew her, Lauren Martinez, served with her husband." Julia's breath caught. "I didn't use any names." "Didn't need to," Noah said softly. "The way you told it, it gave her dignity, gave her struggle meaning." His scarred hand tightened briefly around his mug. "Some stories need telling, even if they shake things up." The storm raged on outside, but inside the old house, something settled into place. Julia opened her laptop, its soft glow joining the firelight. "To my daughter." She typed, with Scout's head heavy on her feet, Noah's steady presence at the window, and Marian humming softly in her chair. "Tonight, I learned that thunder can sound like truth breaking free. That sometimes our strongest moments come in the dark, surrounded by people who stand guard over our courage. That even when storms rage and threats roll in like lightning, we have the power to choose silence or story, fear or freedom." She posted it without hesitation. Within minutes, the comments began appearing. I needed this tonight. Keep writing, sister. Your words are my strength. The storm slowly moved east, its fury spent against the mountains, but something else was building. Something that felt like hope, like purpose, like the first light of dawn after a long, dark night. Julia's hand rested on her belly, feeling her daughter's strong kicks. This child would be born into truth, not silence, into strength, not submission, into a world where stories could shake foundations and words could light up the dark. Let Savannah make her threats. Let Cameron deploy his lawyers. Some things couldn't be bought or silenced or locked away in legal vaults. Some things were as free and wild as mountain storms. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who looked distinctly out of place in his pressed suit on Marian's weathered porch. Julia recognized the law firm's letterhead before she even opened the envelope. Cameron's favorite legal sharks, whose retainer fees could have paid for a new roof. Cease and desist. Defamation of character. Breach of implied confidentiality. Immediate removal of all published content. The words blurred together as her hands began to shake. Scalp pressed against her legs, a warm anchor in the sudden storm of legal terminology. Well? Marian's voice cut through her rising panic. Her aunt stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking more like a mountain than a woman. What are those city folks trying to sell us now? Before Julia could answer, the rumble of Noah's Jeep announced his arrival. He took one look at the scene, the courier retreating to his luxury car, the thick legal envelope in Julia's trembling hands, Marian's protective stance, and his jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Perfect timing, Marian declared. May, get your coat. Noah, you're taking her to meet someone, Aunt Lou. I should deal with this. Oh, you will. Marian's eyes sparkled with something that looked a lot like rebellion. But first, you need to remember what you're fighting for. The morning air was crisp with early spring as Noah's Jeep wound up a mountain road Julia didn't recognize. Scout sat in the back, head out the window, ears flapping in the wind. Noah drove with his usual precision, but there was something different in his posture, a kind of purposeful tension. Where are we going? Julia finally asked, the legal papers heavy in her lap. To see Lauren, he replied quietly. Lauren Martinez. Julia's breath caught. The woman from her blog post, the widow whose story had touched thousands. The Martinez home sat nestled into the hillside, surrounded by a riot of early spring wildflowers. The young boy, maybe 7, was helping a woman plant something in a raised garden bed. Both looked up at the sound of the Jeep. Uncle Noah. The boy launched himself into Noah's arms with the kind of absolute trust only children possess. Noah caught him with practiced ease, his usually stoic expression softening. Lauren Martinez straightened, wiping dirt from her hands onto well-worn jeans. She was younger than Julia had imagined, with laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of joy found after grief. So, Lauren said, studying Julia with gentle understanding, you're the writer. They sat in Lauren's kitchen, drinking tea from mismatched mugs, while the boy, Miguel, showed Scout his collection of toy soldiers in the next room. The legal papers sat untouched on the table between them. When I read your post, Lauren began, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug, it was like someone finally understood. Not just the loss, but the silence, the pressure to be the brave widow everyone expected. She smiled slightly. The way you wrote about finding your voice again, it gave others permission to find theirs. But now they're trying to silence you, Noah observed, his voice carrying an edge Julia hadn't heard before. Lauren's laugh was unexpected and fierce. Let me show you something. She led them to a small home office, its walls covered in photographs. But what caught Julia's eye was the desk, covered with letters, cards, printed emails. After your post went viral, these started coming, Lauren explained. From military wives, from widows, from women who felt invisible. She picked up one letter, its edges worn from repeated handling. This one's from a 19-year-old whose husband came back different. She didn't know how to tell their story until she read yours. I never meant to cause trouble, Julia whispered, one hand resting on her belly. I just needed to tell the truth. Her voice trembled with the weight of responsibility, not just for herself, but for every woman who had unknowingly passed her story into Julia's hands, hoping she'd carry it carefully. Truth is trouble, Lauren said firmly. To the right people. She turned to a photo on the wall. herself in a cap and gown. After Rico died, I went back to school, got my law degree. Want to know why? Miguel's laughter drifted in from the next room, punctuated by Scout's happy bark. Because stories matter, Lauren continued. Because sometimes the law needs to protect voices, not silence them. She picked up the cease and desist letter, scanning it with professional eyes. They're scared, you know, not of what you've said, but of what you might say, of how many others might start speaking too. I can't afford a legal battle, Julia admitted. Everything's frozen. She hesitated, her thumb absently brushing her belly in a slow, protective circle. The baby's due in 8 weeks, she added quietly, voice barely above a breath. I have enough for maybe 2 months of rent, formula, diapers. After that, I don't know. The shame hit her unexpectedly, not because she lacked the means, but because she had once believed she'd never have to worry. She had prepared for motherhood, but not for this kind of war. The words left her like a confession, not just of financial strain, but of fear, the kind that creeps in when the stakes aren't just survival, but legacy. You don't need to, Lauren's smile turned sharp. I've been looking for a pro bono case to make my old professors proud, and I know exactly how these corporate firms think. She held up the letter. May I? Noah's hand found Julia's shoulder, a brief touch of support that felt like a battle line being drawn. On the drive back, the legal papers remained with Lauren, but something else had taken their weight. Something that felt like hope, like purpose, like the first shoots of spring breaking through the winter ground. She kept Rico's story alive, Noah said as they descended the mountain, made it mean something more than loss. Julia opened her laptop, the words already forming. To my daughter. Today I learned about different kinds of courage. The courage of a widow who turns grief into purpose. Of a little boy who keeps his father alive through stories. Of a soldier who guards others' rights to speak as fiercely as he once guarded lives. Her phone buzzed. Savannah again. But this time, Julia let it ring into silence. She had more important words to write. Behind them, the mountains stood witness. Their ancient roots holding firm against all storms, natural or legal, just like the roots of truth, of story, of voices, finally set free. Scout dozed in the back seat, his mission of support complete. For now. And somewhere deep in her belly, Julia's daughter kicked in rhythm with the tapping of keys, adding her own small voice to the growing chorus of those who refused to be silenced. The video appeared on Savannah's Instagram at midnight. My truth, standing against digital harassment. Her face filled the screen, artfully brushed with tears. Carefully curated vulnerability, broadcast to over 1 million followers. I've been silent too long, she began, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. About the anonymous attacks, the thinly veiled accusations, the way my relationship with Cameron has been twisted into something ugly. Julia watched from Marion's porch swing, the mountain night wrapped around her like a protective shawl. Scout's head rested heavy in her lap as Savannah's performance continued. As a women's empowerment advocate, I believe in supporting other women. But when someone uses anonymity as a weapon, spreading half-truths that hurt not just individuals but entire companies, affecting countless employees' livelihoods. Savannah's voice broke. Perfectly. That's not empowerment, that's revenge. The video ended with a call to action. Stand against hate, protect truth, speak with your name. Within hours, it had gone viral. Celebrities and influencers rallied behind Savannah's carefully crafted narrative. Turn that mess off, Marion's voice cut through the digital drama. She emerged from the house carrying 2 mugs of her special nighttime tea, chamomile with a hint of local honey. Ain't nothing true ever needed that much decoration. But the damage was spreading. Julia's blog comments were flooding with hostile messages. Her inbox overflowed with threats. Several major parenting forums had already removed her posts citing community concerns. They're winning, Julia whispered, her hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. 8 months pregnant now, her daughter seemed to sense her distress. Kicking with unusual force. Depends on what game you're playing. Noah's quiet voice startled them both. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps, a familiar silhouette in the darkness. Despite the late hour, he was dressed for work, tool belt at his hip. Thought dawn patrol wasn't till morning, Marion observed, though her tone suggested she'd been expecting him. Different kind of patrol tonight. He climbed the steps, his movements as deliberate as ever. Lauren called. "Things are moving faster than we thought." The baby kicked again as Noah settled onto the porch step, his back against the railing. Scout migrated to sit between them, a furry bridge of support. "Savannah's video was just the first wave," Noah continued. "Lauren got word. They're filing for an emergency injunction tomorrow, trying to force the hosting platforms to reveal your identity." "Can they do that?" The tea in Julia's hand suddenly tasted bitter. "They can try." His voice held the same calm certainty it had the morning they first met, before sunrise, before everything changed. "But Lauren already filed our counter motion, and she found something in Rowan Holdings' corporate records." From his tool belt, Noah produced a small USB drive. Previous settlements, other women who were silenced. He paused, choosing his words with care. "She thinks you're not the first person Cameron tried to erase." The night seemed to hold its breath. In the distance, a whip-poor will called, a lonely sound echoing off the mountains. "I need to go public," Julia said suddenly, the realization crystallizing like frost. "Before they force it, on my terms." Marion began, concern thick in her voice. "No, listen." Julia set her tea aside, her words tumbling out with growing certainty. "All these women reading my blog, sharing their stories, they trusted me with their truth. I can't hide behind anonymity while asking them to be brave." Noah's eyes met hers in the darkness, and in them she saw something unexpected. "Pride. Launching a counteroffensive," he said softly, "drawing the enemy's fire to protect your allies." "Speaking of allies," Marion interjected, "that nice reporter from the Asheville Chronicle's been sniffing around, the one who did that piece on local veterans last year?" She gave Noah a meaningful look. "Kendra Walsh," he nodded. "Solid journalist. Believes in letting people tell their own stories." Julia opened her laptop. Its glow created a soft circle of light in the darkness. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly, until Noah's hand settled on her shoulder. Steady. Grounding. Sure. "To my daughter, and to all the daughters watching, tomorrow I'm going to tell our story. Not because I want to, but because silence has become more dangerous than speaking. Because every woman who shared her truth with me deserves to know she's not alone. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply stand in our own light and say, 'This is who I am. My name is Julia Elise Harper.'" She posted it, just as the first hint of dawn began to paint the mountains in shades of promise. Her phone lit up almost immediately. Notifications, comments, shares, messages of support flooding in faster than she could read them. "Well," Marion said, gathering the empty mugs, "guess we'd better make some coffee. Something tells me tomorrow's going to be a long day." Noah stood, checking his tool belt out of habit. "I'll be back at dawn." "You don't have to," Julia began. "Yes," he said simply. "I do." As if agreeing, Scout took up his post beside Julia's chair, his loyal eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the porch. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, lawyers and reporters, headlines and hashtags, all the noise of a world that preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. But tonight, in this space between decision and dawn, Julia felt something settle in her chest. Something that felt like her mother's strength, like Marion's wisdom, like Noah's unwavering support. Something that felt, finally, like her own voice, clear, true, and unafraid. Let them come with their injunctions and influence, with their carefully crafted narratives and social media armies. Some stories couldn't be silenced, some truths demanded to be told. Some battles were worth any cost, and dawn was coming. The Asheville Gazette office hummed with pre-press tension as Julia sat across from Kendra Walsh. Her hands rested steadily on her 8-month belly. Scout lay at her feet, a constant guardian. Noah stood by the window, his military bearing a quiet, reassuring presence in the corner of her eye. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Kendra asked. Her recorder waited on the desk between them. "Once we publish, there's no going back." Through the newsroom windows, Julia could see the mountains catching the first light, their peaks painted in shades of courage. Lauren Martinez sat in the lobby, legal documents spread across her lap, phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated the counteroffensive. "I'm sure," Julia said. Her voice carried the strength of every woman who had trusted her with their story. "But before we start, there's something you need to see." She opened her laptop, revealing dozens of emails forwarded by Lauren. Women's names jumped from the screen, former employees, partners, even a board member's wife. All silenced by the same legal machinery that had tried to erase Julia. All with stories that echoed her own. "This isn't just about me anymore," Julia continued. "It's about every voice they tried to quiet, every truth they buried under NDAs and settlements." Kendra's eyes widened as she scanned the documents. "This is systematic and verifiable." 3 former employees are willing to go on record, Lauren added, entering the room with purposeful strides. 2 have already signed affidavits. The baby kicked, as if lending her voice to the chorus of truth rising from the ashes. Noah moved closer, his presence solid as the mountains themselves. "Tell me," Kendra said, pressing record. "Start from the beginning." But before Julia could speak, the newsroom erupted with activity. On every screen, breaking news flashed. Savannah Blake was holding an emergency press conference in Manhattan. The footage showed her outside Rowan Holdings headquarters. Cameron stood supportively at her side. Her designer dress was battlefield armor. Her tears, precise weapons. "I know who's behind the anonymous blog," Savannah announced to the assembled reporters. A disgruntled former employee, someone who chose vindictive fiction over facing her own failures. Lauren's phone buzzed. "They're filing the injunction now," she whispered, trying to stop the Gazette story. But Julia barely heard her. On screen, Savannah was weaving a masterful narrative of corporate betrayal and personal vendetta. Yet something in her performance struck a false note, a brittleness behind the polish, a fear behind the force. "She's scared," Noah observed quietly. "Not of you, of them." He nodded toward the glowing screen of Julia's laptop. The emails, the affidavits, the truths no longer hidden. She knew what they did to women who became inconvenient. Understanding bloomed like dawn. Savannah wasn't just Cameron's ally, she was his next target. Another voice to be shaped, used, and eventually silenced when it no longer served his purpose. Julia's fingers found her mother's locket, drawing strength from its familiar silver warmth. Then she turned to Kendra, her voice clear and steady. "The real story isn't about a blog, or a divorce, or even corporate corruption," she began. "It's about the cost of silence, the weight of it, the way it becomes a prison we build around ourselves." For the next hour, she spoke her truth. Not with anger or accusation, but with the quiet power of someone who had found her voice in the depths of loss. She talked about the subtle erosion of self, about the difference between peace and silence, about the courage of every woman who had reached out through the darkness to say, "Me too." Halfway through the interview, Lauren's phone lit up with urgent messages. The injunction had been denied. The affidavits were now public record. More women were coming forward. And then, like a thunderclap in a clear sky, Savannah's press conference imploded. A reporter asked about the former board member's wife, about the pattern of settlements, about the ecosystem of silence built with legal contracts and social pressure. On screen, Savannah faltered. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and in her eyes Julia saw something she recognized. Fear. The kind she once carried, the terror of disappearing into someone else's story. That's when Julia did something unexpected. She asked Kendra to add one more thing to the article. To Savannah, there's still time to write your own story. To choose truth over performance, authenticity over approval. The women you tried to silence, we'll make room for your voice too, when you're ready to speak your real truth, because that's what this was always about. Not revenge, not destruction, but the right of every woman to author her own life. You don't have to disappear. None of us do. Not anymore. The newsroom held its breath as Kendra filed the story. Lauren coordinated with national outlets. Noah stood steady, scout at attention beside him, as the first digital copies went live. Within hours, it spread like wildfire across social media. Women shared it, with their own stories attached. Our author, her own life, started trending. Rowan Holdings stock took a hit as shareholders demanded answers. But what mattered most wasn't the virality or the corporate fallout. It was the messages flooding in from women everywhere. I found my voice today. Finally, telling my story. Not alone anymore. As the mountain sun climbed higher, Julia stood at the newsroom window, her daughter active beneath her heart. Behind her, Noah discussed security protocols with Lauren. Beside her, Scout maintained his quiet vigil. Her phone buzzed one last time. An unknown number. The text was brief. "How do you start telling the truth?" It was from Savannah. Julia rested her hand on her belly, where her daughter kicked in rhythm with the tapping of keys as she typed her reply. You just did. Dawn arrived with the first contraction. Julia had been sitting in her mother's old rocking chair, watching the spring rain paint the mountains in watercolor grays, when the pain wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. Scout's head lifted from her feet, eyes alert with canine understanding. It's time, she whispered, both to her faithful companion and to the daughter who had witnessed her entire journey back to strength. The next hours blurred into a symphony of sensation. Marian's steady hands helped her down the stairs. Noah arrived precisely at his dawn patrol hour. Perfect timing as always, Marian would later joke. The jeep moved carefully through mountain roads that knew how to keep secrets. Between contractions, Julia's phone lit up with updates from Lauren. In the month since the Gazette article, the landscape had shifted. Like mountain terrain after a storm. Rowan Holdings now faced a board investigation. 3 more women had filed lawsuits. Savannah had resigned her position. Her private Instagram was now filled with raw, honest posts about recovery and redemption. But none of that mattered now. The only truth that counted was the one writing itself in Julia's body. Ancient knowledge pulsing with every contraction, in the rhythm of rain on hospital windows, in the circle of support that had gathered around her in the small mountain medical center. Remember to breathe, Noah said softly from his post by the door, his military vigilance transformed into something gentler. Scout, wearing a hastily procured therapy dog vest, courtesy of Lauren's legal creativity, hadn't left Julia's side. Just like your mama, Marian observed, wiping Julia's forehead with a cool cloth. She brought you into the world during a spring storm too, same determination in her eyes. Another contraction built like thunder. Julia gripped her mother's locket, its silver warm with generations of strength. Dr. Chen's calm presence anchored the room as morning light began to pierce the storm clouds. Almost there, he encouraged. Your daughter's ready to write her own story. The final moments came in waves, of power, of purpose. Julia heard her own voice, no longer silent, no longer small, but clear and strong and full of life. And then, cutting through the storm's diminishing drumroll, another voice joined hers. Her daughter's first cry, fierce, free, unafraid. Hello, little truth-teller, Julia whispered as the newborn was placed on her chest. Tiny fingers gripped her mother's locket, as if claiming her inheritance of courage. Through eyes blurred with joyful tears, Julia studied her daughter's face. The determined set of her tiny mouth, the way her brow furrowed with newborn concentration. All the strength of the mountain seemed distilled into this small, perfect being who had been her silent partner through every battle. What's her name? Dr. Chen asked, pen hovering over the birth certificate. Julia smiled, remembering every story that had led to this moment. Arya, she said softly. Arya Rose Harper. A name that spoke of voice and beauty, and growing wild and free. Scout's tail thumped, quiet approval against the hospital floor. And Noah's hand found Julia's shoulder, in its now familiar gesture of strength and unwavering support. Marian's happy tears fell like gentle rain later that afternoon, as Arya slept peacefully in the hospital bassinet. Julia opened her laptop one last time. Her blog had become a sanctuary for truth-tellers, a gathering place for women reclaiming their voices. Today, she had one more story to share. To my daughter, and to all the daughters, you were born in a storm. But you didn't come into this world silent. Your first breath was a declaration. Your first cry, a testimony. You arrived exactly as you were meant to be, strong, authentic, free. The world may try to teach you silence, to convince you that peace means disappearing into someone else's story. But you carry in your veins the courage of mountains, the strength of spring storms, the truth of all the women who dared to speak. Your name means melody, and my greatest wish is that you'll always sing your song, exactly as it lives in your heart. No modifications, no apologies, no artificial polish to make others comfortable. You were never meant to be silent. You were meant to be heard. You were meant to be true, and you will never walk alone. Love, Mama. As if in response, Arya stirred, her newborn eyes blinking open, taking in the world she would help shape. Scout moved to guard her bassinet, his loyalty already transferred to this newest member of their unlikely family. Noah sat in the visitor's chair, quietly mending a loose hinge on the door, his way of ensuring their safety, as always. Through the window, the storm had cleared, revealing mountains painted in spring's freshest palette. Somewhere in those ancient peaks, other women were finding their voices, telling their truths, choosing authenticity over artifice. Julia touched her mother's locket, now holding a tiny photo of Arya beside the old picture of her own mother. 3 generations of women who refused to be silenced. And for the first time, that legacy didn't feel like a burden. It felt like armor, woven from memory, courage, and love. It felt like home. The story hadn't ended. In many ways, it was just beginning. But as Julia watched her daughter sleep, guarded by love and loyalty, surrounded by hard-won truth and tender strength, she knew. Some victories didn't need to shout. Some revolutions happened in whispers. Some battles were won simply by living your truth, day by day, choice by choice, voice by voice. And sometimes the greatest triumph was simply this: a woman, whole and free, a child, born into truth, a love strong enough to guard them both. Dawn would always come, and with it, always the chance to speak. 1 year later, the mountain autumn painted the world in shades of courage, bold reds, fierce oranges, and golds as bright as truth. On Marian's front porch, now transformed into an impromptu gathering space, women sat in rocking chairs and on well-worn steps, each holding a copy of Julia's newly published book, Silence No More: A Mountain Mother's Journey to Truth. Arya, celebrating her first birthday, toddled between the guests on sturdy legs, Scout following every step like a devoted shadow. Her laughter, free and uninhibited, rang out against the mountain slopes that had once witnessed her mother's transformation. "Read it again," someone called from the group. "The part about the storm." Julia smiled, touching the familiar weight of her mother's locket, now containing 3 generations of photos. The publishing advance had bought Marian a new roof and helped start a foundation supporting women breaking free from corporate silence. But the real wealth sat in these wooden chairs. Women who had found their voices, who had chosen truth over comfort, authenticity over appearance. Lauren Martinez, now head of the foundation's legal team, sat with her son Miguel, who was teaching Arya the finer points of keeping Scout's attention with treats. The former military widow had helped dozens more women navigate their way to freedom, each story adding strength to their growing chorus. And Savannah was there too, seated quietly at the edge of the group, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a soft sweater. Savannah's social media was now dedicated to authentic storytelling, supporting other women's journeys to truth. Her own book, a memoir on corporate culture and redemption, was set for release in the spring. Noah worked steadily in the background, as always, replacing worn boards on Marian's porch steps. His quiet strength had become as much a part of Julia's life as the mountains themselves. The relationship had grown slowly, naturally, like wild mountain flowers finding their way through stone. Beautiful because it was unforced, strong because it was real. Rowan Holdings had undergone its own transformation. After the board investigation revealed systemic issues, Cameron had been asked to step down. The company now had its first female CEO and a zero-tolerance policy for silencing tactics. The corporate world was slowly learning that authentic voices created stronger foundations than polished silence. "Actually," Julia said, rising to address the group of gathered women on Marian's porch, "I'd like to read something new. Something I wrote this morning." She opened her laptop. Arya crawled into her lap with perfect timing. Scout settled at their feet. To the daughters of silence. "1 year ago, I thought strength meant surviving without a sound. I thought peace meant perfect pictures and pressed smiles. I thought love meant making yourself smaller to fit someone else's frame. I was wrong. Strength is the sound of your own voice, speaking truth, even when it shakes. Peace is the quiet that comes from being authentically, unapologetically yourself. Love is the circle that guards your voice, while helping you find it. To every woman still searching for her words, your story matters, your voice matters, your truth matters. The mountains have taught me the most powerful changes often come quietly, like dawn breaking over ancient peaks, like spring working its way through frozen ground, like a child's first words in a world waiting to hear her song. You are not alone. You never were. And your voice, oh your voice, is just beginning to rise. Keep speaking, keep writing, keep breaking the silence that was never yours to carry. The dawn is always coming, and with it always the chance to speak your truth, always the chance to begin again. With love and solidarity, Julia. As her words faded into the mountain twilight, other voices rose, sharing stories, offering support, building connections. Arya, secure in her mother's lap, played with the locket, her small fingers tracing the shape of legacy and love. Noah paused in his work, his eyes meeting Julia's with quiet pride. Marion brought out her specialty, chamomile tea with a hint of local honey, the scent mingling with the mountain air. Scout maintained his watch, gray now beginning to touch his muzzle, but his loyalty undimmed. And the mountains stood sentinel as darkness fell, quiet witnesses to a revolution that had begun with a whisper and ended in a chorus. Their ancient faces held centuries of women's stories. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new voices, new truths to be told. But tonight, in this circle of strength and authenticity, surrounded by the family she had chosen and the truth she had earned, Julia knew this was what victory looked like. Not in headlines or hashtags, not in revenge or retribution, but in women gathering, in voices rising, in truth flowing free like mountain streams. Each voice added to the current, swift and unstoppable, carrying the weight of what had been unsaid for far too long. In a little girl who would grow up knowing her voice mattered. In a mother who had found her way back to herself, in a circle of strength that would never be broken. The silence was well and truly broken. And in its place, a chorus of authenticity, a symphony of truth, a song that would never end. And though the melody had begun with her, Julia knew it no longer belonged to her alone. It belonged to every woman who had ever whispered her story into the dark, hoping someone, anyone, might hear. What would you do if silence was no longer an option? If the only way forward was your own voice? Dear friend, in life we are often taught that silence is strength, that to endure quietly is somehow noble. But as the Stoics remind us, strength isn't the absence of hardship. It's the clarity to choose truth in its face. Julia's journey wasn't about grand gestures or perfect outcomes. It was about reclaiming the quiet power of her voice, one whisper at a time. When the world tried to write over her story, she picked up the pen with trembling hands and wrote anyway. So if today finds you facing your own silence, I hope you remember this. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to be honest. That's how revolutions begin. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a truth waiting to be told.